after he got home from the service, he went back down to the place where they had their trucks, but his partner had not driven truck all the while he was gone. And so they lost all their grandfather rights, and they lost their both of their big trucks. They had a little one left. And so there was no business left and nothing they could do. So he took the little truck and got jobs working for Bill Holmes. He worked for him for quite a long time, trucking potatoes and helping in the planting and harvesting and so forth. Dick was in high school now, and Jean was in junior high. They were both good students. They got along fine, and they enjoyed school. And they had fun at home. They had a youth society in the church, and they were active in that. There was lots to do. They kept them busy, and their friends came there like they had in the past and played games, and it was an enjoyable time for everybody, but it was a worrisome time because we didn't have steady work. In 1947, Floyd built a 4-story chicken coop, cinder block building on our place, and we filled that up with white-legged chickens. So that kept us busy. The kids and I gathered the eggs and graded them, and we sold crates of them. The man came once a week and picked up the crates of eggs. That kept us plenty busy all the time doing that. In 1948, Dick graduated from high school. He was president of his class and salutatorian, so he had to make a speech, and I've thought about it since. He got all over his early shyness because he made a good speech and got along, had a lot of fun in his classes. He got completely over being so shy. He wanted to go to college so bad, so he applied at Houghton. That was $850 a year compared to $17,000 now. But of course, times are a lot different then. He got a job at Birdseye that summer right after he graduated, and he got 62 cents an hour. But he could work as long as he wanted to. They had no 40-hour-a-week restrictions like they do now. He could work any number of hours that he could stand it to work. So that made it good. He earned his entire way through college with that job there at Birdseye. In Jean's junior year, she was very ill for quite a long time. She had a disease called purpura, and she had to have transfusions. It was a blood disease, and she was laid up from January about till April, but she kept her schoolwork up, so she didn't miss that. The kids brought her homework home. The teachers were real good about helping her with catching up the work and so forth. She was in the hospital for quite a lot of that time, and I think that was one of the things that made her decision to be a nurse. She had always talked about she'd like to be a nurse, but it didn't come to finality till she was there and saw how it was done and so forth. She graduated in '50, and she applied at Arnott Ogden and was accepted there. She did very well in school. She was above 90 average all the time, but there were 2 kids in that class that had above 95 average, and so she had no chance to be valedictorian or salutatorian, but she did very well, and we were very proud of her. She worked at Birdseye, too. All the kids around that were going to go to college afterwards I would make a special effort to use them, because of course their season was usually from the first part of June to the last part of October, so it worked in well with college kids. She had a list of things that she had to bring besides her regular clothing, so we took her down, and then we could make a tour of the training class part of the hospital, and where her room would be and so forth. And then later there was a capping ceremony. After so many months they received their cap, and we went to that too. That was always interesting. All those things are so nice they do to make it more, so we understand more what's going on in their training. Now to go back to 1948, in the December of that year, Brian Clarence was born. We hadn't had a baby in a long time in our house, so it was a joy to have him. He was a good little fellow and a cute little guy. We just loved him to pieces. One little thing, interesting thing about when we had those chickens was that the feed came in colored feed bags. And when they'd come and bring a load of feed, trucks, guys would bring it, we'd go through it and look for patterns that we could use. I remember I made jumpers for the 3 girls that all looked alike. We made a lot of curtains for kitchen windows and like that. We made many things out of them that we could use. And also the people that came here to buy eggs always wanted to look over the feed bags too, and they'd buy them from us. Because people all over were using them. We just thought it was a thrill to have those bags like that to use, and cloth that we didn't have to buy. Of course, it wasn't fine percale like you would find in a store, but they were good, solid material, and they lasted for years. And the color held good too. I kept them for a long time. The kids wore them, and they lasted. One of the things that was disappointing was when Carolyn got over her rheumatic fever and started school again in the fall. School officials said she was young for her grade anyway, because her birthday was in the fall of the year, and they thought she ought to take the 3rd grade over. And that was a terrible thing to tell a child, because that seemed like she'd failed. And they said probably she could do the work, but they thought there was a lot of changes to be made in the 4th grade, and it might be a little hard for her to, having lost so much of her year in the 3rd grade, to make it up. So we agreed that she better take the 3rd grade over. It was not only a disappointment because it seemed like she didn't pass, in other words, but she couldn't be in the same grade with Ellen, and that was heartbreaking to her. Of course, they could ride home from school on the bus together. They could still have their birthdays together, but it just wasn't quite the same thing as being in the same grade. Now it was time for Bruce to go to school. Bruce was very Dutchy in his talking, and Pat picked up his way of talking instead of talking like we did. They seemed to be able to understand each other perfectly, and we could understand them pretty good, but other people just couldn't. Their language was one of their own. I remember one day we walked up to Pearl Pauling's, and they sat out on the porch, and we were visiting, and Pearl stepped to the door for something, and she listened to him a few minutes, and she come back in. She says, "I'd swear there was a couple of foreigners on my front porch." He started kindergarten that fall, and he got along fine. And back then, they didn't teach any reading in kindergarten. It was just learning to be away from home and learning to adjust with other children and to play well with other children and so forth. So he got along fine in kindergarten. Then came first grade, and he just could not seem to learn to read. We hired college students in the summer, different summers, to help him, and we'd work with him at home there and try to get him to read, but he would just not seem to be able to. One time he came home from Joyce Parker's, and where she was one that helped him, tried to help him read. And he read a whole page, and I was real encouraged. And then I pointed out a word, and he had no idea what that word was. And then I pointed out another, and that was the same. And then it came to me. He had just simply recited that whole page from memory. So in reading and writing, he could not get along at all. But in arithmetic, that was a different story. He could handle that. I took him to a clinic once that was supposed to figure out reasons why children didn't learn. And the man talked to me quite a long time and treating him as if he was retarded. And then he said, we'll go in the other room and we'll run some tests. And he came back and he said, well, this is a different story. This boy's IQ is fine. For some reason, he just can't read. But he never told me why. I didn't find out till years later the reason why he couldn't read. He has a condition, a problem called dyslexia. It's a condition where the words are backward. I had noticed that he said saw instead of was, and ton instead of not, and some other words like that, but it didn't mean anything to me. By the time I found it out, I don't know if there was anything could be done, but it was too late anyway. He had formed a habit of figuring out the words that he needed to and read what he had to, and usually there was someone there that would read for him, or we would. So he had just gotten along fine without learning to read. Pat started school the next year after Bruce did, and she got along fine in the first and second grade. In the third grade, it was a problem because there were 3 teachers that year. The first one got married early in the year, and then the next one that came to fill in was ill most of the time she taught. Finally, she had to quit the last of February. And then we had a good teacher came and tried to finish out the year, but it made it hard for all of them in the 4th grade. Brian was doing well. In the spring of 49, he had pneumonia, so he was in the hospital for a while then, but he got all right, and he was a happy little guy, and we enjoyed him so much. In the spring of 49, Floyd also started another trucking company. He bought some trucks and got some new accounts and started trucking, and that went along pretty good until the spring of 1950. Then the trucks were old to begin with, and they began breaking down on their trips, and he lost accounts because they were late with their deliveries. And it was a bad time. He had a long session of bad luck with trucks and with accounts and so forth. In the summer of 1950, he had a nervous breakdown within the hospital for quite a while. Dick came home from college early in June at the end of his sophomore year, and he started work again at Birdseye as he had before. Jean graduated that June, and in that same June, Gerald Lyle was born. I remember it was Regents Week, and I had left for the hospital early in the morning of that day, and the word came up to where Dick was working, and they said I had a baby boy, so he knew Jean would be real interested, so he went to the window outside the room where she was taking the exam and said, "It's a boy." And the teacher, Mr. Bateman, looked and thought, what on earth is she hollering out the window for in the middle of a Regents exam? So he asked her, and she says, "Oh, we got a new baby brother." He said, "Oh, just another baby." He thought it was something important. Floyd was sick quite a while after that, and poor health. He kept on struggling, trying to work, but he was not in good health at all. And so he sold the trucks, and we also sold the chickens because he went to work at Birdseye as a night watchman. That was a regular income, and it was good that he had that job. And in the spring of 1951, I went to work there also. Carolyn was in the 8th grade and a real capable girl, so she could watch the children. She loved having the whole house to herself to run. She was just a natural-born housekeeper, I guess. She still is today. At Birdseye, they did frozen food. The first they did in the spring was spinach. Boxes came down the track, and we put handfuls of spinach and tried to get the 10 ounces in it as it was supposed to be. The next people would weigh it and put in or take out what they had to make it right. Then it went to a folding machine and then to a wrapping machine. This was all new to me, of course, and it used new muscles and was very tiring for a while. About the 3rd day, Steve Mulder, he was one of the office men, came in and gave us a real strong talk. We had to do more. We had to get them more accurate. And he scared me half to death, and I thought, of course, I'm going to be fired. One who who'd worked there for a long time knew that weren't upset at all. They said, "Oh, he does this every so often. Don't worry about it." And I didn't get fired. After spinach was green beans, and then came corn, and then fall spinach again. They only used the regular workers for the fall spinach, so I was all through in September. Floyd was still a night watchman. Dick was back at college, and Jean had a short vacation that summer, and she worked a little while at Birdseye. Then she was back at nurses training again. She was doing fine and really liking it. She had dated a few young men, and now she was dating one of the nephews of the Paulings, Shirley, his name was. And he was one who played ball with her when she was a little girl. And they were just good friends then, and no romance. This sounded more serious. Dick was in his senior year at college. He had dated some girls, too, and one especially from Ohio, and that seemed serious, too. On October 14th, we were getting ready for the church. Carolyn was the oldest at home then, and we went to get in the car, and it had a flat tire. So we went up and rode to church with the Paulings. Bruce had an upset stomach, so he didn't go. Floyd was sleeping. He worked from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. In the middle of Sunday school, Francine, a doctor, came in and told me that my house was on fire. It was just a terrible time for a few minutes there. I thought of Bruce. Was he outside? Did Floyd wake up? I rode home with Francina. The other children got in too, and the house was completely enveloped with flames when we got there. Floyd and Bruce were standing in the crowd there, so that was a big relief. But what was all this crowd of people? I remember thinking, what are they here for? Because it was an upsetting time to us. I didn't like the idea of all those other people there, and then I thought afterwards that that's the way it is. If there's something like that going on, people always go and watch it. We went up to my parents' house that night. Their whole upstairs was empty. One room was reserved for Fern to use when she came home. One large bedroom we slept in with little beds for the boys, and the other children slept on couches and in the hallway and so forth. Next day we went down and looked at what was remained of the fire. Everything was gone or damaged beyond use. We had bought a refrigerator, the first one we'd ever owned. There were iron beds there that reminded me of the fact that it could have been much worse. In the room next to ours were 2 little iron beds for Brian and Gerry, and I couldn't help but think how awful it would have been if it had happened in the middle of the night. We knew we would have to stay there for a while. There was one large room in the back of the house that had been used, and downstairs that had been used for storage. We emptied that out and papered the walls, and that we used for our living room. And the kitchen was the same one that my mother and father had used in the other part of the house. And Floyd got a sink and kitchen stove for them to use in there, so they had that kitchen and dining room and a living room and bedroom. So it was large enough for us that we used the upstairs to sleep. There was a large room up there that had never been finished off, so Floyd made 2 bedrooms up out of that, a part of that, and the 2 girls slept in one and Bruce in the other, so that worked out for the time being. But turned out we stayed there, but at the time we thought it was temporary. The news of the fire, of course, went around the area, and we had clothes and furniture and many needed things sent in. And Floyd was working steadily then, so we bought things that we needed besides what was given to us. Of the children, it was really the hardest on Carolyn. Dick and Jean had all their clothing with them at college and nursing school, and the little smaller ones were supplied by friends or what we bought. So it was Carolyn that really felt the loss most. It was near her birthday, and she knew she was getting a red corduroy skirt for her birthday. I don't remember how she knew it, but she did, and she was looking forward to that. And of course that burned. And she was going to be 14, so of course diaries and keepsakes that she'd had for a few years were more important to her than to the younger ones. But life settled down, and we got into the routine of daily living, and things went on for a long time in orderly fashion. At the end of the first semester of Dick's senior year, he was informed that he could teach in Nunday High School, teach math. And he was anxious to do that as finances were beginning to get a little tight, and that would have made it so he wouldn't have to borrow or anything like that. He could go on and finish school and teach that one class. And then he had to have a car. He got a little gray coupe. It was a cute little car, a nice car. I wished I could have been there to see him get in the first time. It's always so important to have your first car. So he went to teaching in the Nunday school, and that was a complete change in his life plan. Geraldine Howard was one of his students in his senior math class. His interest in the Mary Ellen from Ohio began to wane at that time, and all we heard about was Geraldine this and Gerry this and so forth. In March of that year, he received word that he would receive a direct commission from the Air Force. In other words, he would go into the Air Force as a second lieutenant. He had taken a test in the fall that had been given to the college kids around, and that was why he got the commission as a result of that. We went to his graduation, of course. That was a thrilling thing, the first one of our children to graduate from college. And after the graduation, we went to a picnic at Letchworth Park. Geraldine, of course, came along with us, and we got to see more of her and get more acquainted with her at that time. In September, he left for New York City. And that was a farewell. We thought it'd be a long time before we'd see him again. But we went down there to visit in the fall, and we took Geraldine and Carolyn with us. Fern came up from Hornell to stay at the house to help take care of the other children there at home. That was a lot of fun. It's the first time I'd ever gone to New York City, and the only time I ever went to New York City. But it was enough. I didn't care about going back. There was another boy's apartment quite near where Dick's was, and so he let Carolyn and Gerry stay in his extra bedroom, and Dick slept on the couch so we could have his room. So we made out real well, and we went around and saw the sights of New York City a little, not too much, but we went up in the Empire State Building and looked at the Statue of Liberty from there, and interesting things that you hear about New York City. Of course, there's lots more now than there was then, but it was very interesting. After that, Dick and Gerry decided to be married. They were going to be married in March. Our church had a shower for them, and we planned the wedding, or they planned the wedding, but we planned our dresses. We each had a new dress for it. I remember I had a dark red dress, and Carolyn had a purple one, and Pat had a blue one. It was nice. We were going to look all right at the wedding. They were married in the Nunday church, of course, and they had a nice reception afterwards, and Dick had bought a new car then, and they left on their honeymoon in that new car. Jean was in her senior year at nurses training. It was the year that polio was so bad around, so many cases of polio, and they had a new treatment where they wrapped their legs or arms or whatever was affected with hot blankets, and it was very tiring for the nurses. I remember Jean would say she just was so tired. She was when she'd get through taking care of one of those children. And then one time she worked so hard with one little child that she got so attached to, but the child died, and it was a very difficult time for her. Shirley Pauling was down seeing her very often now, visiting at the nurse's school and where she worked when she could have time off and so forth. She had always wanted to get another degree in nursing, but in order to do that, she had to go another year. They were talking of marriage, but she wanted to get it before she got married. So we went to her graduation. That was a very nice program. I enjoyed that a lot. Our whole family went. We took the children and all of them. It was Jean received an award. I've been trying to think of the name of it. There were several awards given in different categories, but hers was another one, but it was really bedside manner, best bedside manner, but that isn't what they called it. That's what it amounted to. She always did have a very friendly, outgoing way. All her life she had that trait of raising people's spirits as she came to them or talked to them or saw them for a short time. So Jean came home with us from the graduation, and we had a picnic there at my parents' place, and my mother and father and Fern and everybody was at that. It was a nice time. Jean found a place where she could go to college and get that degree she wanted. It was a place in Illinois called Greenville College. So she applied and got accepted there, and she made her plans to go there. She knew she would be there for a whole year, and probably not come home in that year. And she got a trunk and packed that full of all the different things that she couldn't get in her suitcases. She had a full trunk of things. And Jumbo took her out there, but the trunk went by rail. The kids at church had a farewell party for her, and they made a big deal about her going out west to be educated and all that kind of stuff that kids always do. So she went out there to that college, and she wrote back about it and seemed to think it was all right when she first went. She made some new friends and everything, but it didn't work out for some reason. She didn't want to stay there, and she decided to come back home. Jumbo told her that he'd come get her. If she wanted to come home, he wouldn't stand in her way of having a further education or anything like that. But if she wanted to come home, he'd come get her with the understanding that they got married immediately. So that was the arrangement. She came home, and she went to work at St. James, and they began planning their wedding. Her trunk never got back until a long time, and didn't get there to the college till after she left to come home, so they had to ship it back, and that was a joke around the kids at church. They thought that was a big deal. They had a paper they published at that time, and in it they had Jean Alderman made a short trip through some of the western states. It was sort of a joke around there, her not staying. So plans are going for their wedding. It was to be in December, and of course she was going to be married in our church. She was having Donna Collins as maid of honor, and Carolyn was bridesmaid, and Ellen Mattoon was bridesmaid. And Bill Pauling, Jumbo's brother, was best man, and Roger Ryder was usher. and Dick was an usher. So it was all had it just as the way they wanted it. We had ice cream and cake for the reception. And she received many nice gifts like you always do at a wedding. They had bought a trailer and had that set up someplace in Houghton because Jumbo was going to Houghton College at that time. And so she was going to live there in Houghton, and she got a job in the Cuba hospital to start when she got back from her wedding trip. I don't know where they were going on their wedding trip. I knew, I've forgotten now. But they started, and then later we heard that they didn't go where they intended to go. They snuck back and went to their trailer there in Houghton. Jean had been over there several different times, getting it settled and furnishings brought in and so forth. But they were so anxious to go there and live as man and wife, so that's what they did. So Carolyn was the big girl at home now. She had gotten along fine in school. After she had to take the third grade over, she made new friends, and they became good friends that she still has to this day. She was always very helpful and took care of Brian and Gerry a lot. She'd take them in the seat with her at church and let them sit with her. She said they're so much cuter than any of the other kids. She liked to visit Jean and Houghton, and she did once in a while when she could. In January of 1954, Karen Sue was born. Dick and Gerry were stationed at the Tampa Air Force Base. And that was an exciting time. As our first grandchild, we received snapshots of her. And in July of that year, Floyd and I went to Tampa to see her. It was later said that it was the hottest week of the year. We enjoyed it though, and we enjoyed our stay. Karen was 6 months old then. We both took off from our work for that week. About this time, Floyd went to work for Dick Goodrich in Avoca. That lasted for some time. In April of 1955, Deborah Lynn was born. She was an nice addition to our family. We all enjoyed her, all except Gerry. His nose was really broken. He'd been the baby for a long time, and he didn't like the idea of not having his mother hold him all the time, and now this new baby came and took over, and he didn't really like it. As I've mentioned before, the Paulings lived next door, and Gladys, one of the sisters, was in the car insurance business, and she did the business right in her home there. So she hired Carolyn to come and help with the filing. And that was a big help because Carolyn worked 2 or 3 nights a week down there. And that gave her some money to save toward her schooling and money to buy clothes with and school supplies and so forth. She worked there all that year and all of the junior year and all of her senior year there. Carolyn wasn't sure what she wanted to do after she got out of high school. She thought of nursing, but she wasn't sure. Fern worked for the State Department and had a job in the Rochester Employment Office, and she got Carolyn a job taking care of children where both the parents worked. It was near Highland Hospital. One of the times she had to take one of the children to the emergency room. That helped make up her decision to be a nurse. When she came home, she said she wanted to apply to Highland Hospital. That was the hospital that was near where she lived and worked up there. And so she sent in her application at the beginning of her senior year. It was a busy year. She had a part in a senior play, and she could stay down with friends in Avoca to practice for that. They couldn't stay down for sports because that was every night and every night. But this way it was only a couple nights a week they had to stay down. They were all in plays, and they worked it that way, that they'd find places to stay until Floyd could pick them up after work, or they'd get home some other way. In January of 1956, Carol Lee and Lynn were born to Dick and Gerry. They were quite premature, so they had to stay in the hospital for quite a while. They were a lot of care when they came home, so Carolyn went down there and stayed a while to help Geraldine in the middle of her senior year. After graduation, she went to work at Birdseye along with the other kids that worked there. And that she was going to use that toward her schooling. Long toward the end of her senior year, they announced that Highland Hospital had given 2 full scholarships to 2 students that wanted to go there and train to be nurses. And the school picked Carolyn and Doris Alsheimer. That was a big help because she wouldn't have to have any money for going to school, and she could work 1 day a month as a nurse's aide, so that would give her spending money. It was really a godsend to us. In June of that year, Kathleen Joy was born to Jean and Jumble. We were so anxious to see her. It was quite a while before we did, because I was working at Birdseye then, and Floyd was working full-time. But they came down when she was just still a tiny baby, and we got to see her. Jumbo had taken a job up in the northern part of the state, near Salem, New York. They came down every year for part of their summer, and Jumbo's parents lived down farther down on Nails Creek, so it wasn't too far from where we lived. So they stayed there most of the time and just came up to our house to visit and have meals with us and so forth, because our house was still pretty full. Brian and Gerry did well in school. Bruce always struggled. He disliked every part of it. He wanted to be outside or to be tinkering with a bike or something. He was never any problem in school. He never got sent to principal office or anything. He quit when he was 16. In April of 1957, Mark Howard was born to Dick and Gerry. That was our first grandson, so of course we were happy over that. In July of that year, Kimberly was born to Jean and Jumbo. Dick's time was up in the Air Force, and he got a job teaching at the Star Point School that was near Niagara Falls. Our church in Haskinville was 100 years old that year, and we had a celebration. All the people who had gone there to church were invited, and many of them came. The local people furnished the dinner and had the jobs of running the day. I was in the nursery. I guess they thought I'd furnish most of the occupants with my own and my grandchildren. Dick and Jean both came with their families, and with Debbie that made 6 little girls. Mark was just a baby, and Jerry kept him. I wasn't there all the time. His mother was in bed all the time now. Dad took a great deal of care of her, though.